The conversation kicked off with discussions about digital addiction and the overwhelming presence of screen time in daily life. They examined the psychological impact of constant screen engagement, noting how people often spend more time looking at screens than they do asleep. This leads to a significant shift in how individuals experience reality, with the digital world becoming more real than actual physical surroundings for many, especially young people. The podcast highlighted the behavioral science behind this compulsive usage, revealing how tech companies employ behavioral psychologists to design apps and platforms that hook users, making it an unfair fight for willpower. There was also a humorous observation about people staring at their hands for hours while holding their phones, likening this to a hypothetical drug that causes them to do just that. The conversation covered emerging augmented reality, AR, technology, such as AR glasses, that could overlay social media feeds into one's field of vision, suggesting a future where digital experiences blend even more deeply with the physical world. This progression, while technologically fascinating, also raises concerns about humans losing touch with genuine human interactions and becoming overly absorbed in digital stimuli. A major part of the dialogue focused on climate change, skepticism about prevailing narratives, and broader environmental concerns. They critiqued the exaggerated predictions seen in popular media, such as the movie An Inconvenient Truth, pointing out how some forecasts of catastrophic events like rapid sea level rise or glacier melts turned out to be inaccurate or overstated in their timing. The discussion also emphasized that while pollution and waste remain pressing environmental problems, the intense focus on carbon dioxide and climate change might be disproportionately politicized or financially motivated. Chris argued that many green initiatives are riddled with inefficiency and excessive overhead, suggesting that billions of dollars intended for environmental causes often end up enriching management rather than solving environmental problems. They explored the idea of perverse incentives within climate activism, people focusing on appearing virtuous or protecting their jobs rather than affecting real change. The debate touched upon existential risk rankings, noting that climate change, while a concern, scores lower compared to threats like AI or engineered pandemics, yet it dominates public and political attention. The power of social media platforms to shape discourse, promote tribalism, and encourage groupthink was analyzed in depth. The guests described how social media often discourages independent thinking by aggregating popular opinions, thereby compelling people to adopt crowd behaviors rather than form their own. Parasocial relationships, where audiences feel intimate connections to media figures they only know through digital content, were underscored as influential, sometimes more so than interactions with real-life family, like parents. Concerns about censorship, shadow banning, and manipulation of narratives by tech companies and intelligence agencies were raised. The discussion referenced Twitter files and notable examples where platforms restricted content, such as the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story. This control of information leads to fears about lost free speech and increased polarization. While Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter was credited with introducing more openness, the long-term trajectory of free speech online remains uncertain due to the blending of corporate interests and governmental pressures. A substantial segment revolved around the psychology and effectiveness of activism, particularly environmental activism. It was shared that increasing the volume of protests or outrage does not necessarily convince people. Often, the opposite reaction occurs. Loud or confrontational activism risks alienating the very audience activists want to engage, driving people away rather than fostering meaningful change. The podcast referenced the Cassandra complex, where individuals foresee future problems accurately but are ignored or disbelieved. This led to an argument for strategic persuasion, understanding where others currently stand and guiding them step by step instead of shouting down dissenters. Another point emphasized was the distinction between genuine crisis and performative activism, warning against virtue signaling or weaponizing compassion in ways that alienate moderates or those skeptical of a cause. The Venice Canal green dye protest was dissected as an example of attention-seeking that harms public goodwill more than it advances environmental objectives. The discussion touched on recent controversies in sports involving transgender athletes competing in women's events. A fresh case was examined where a transgender athlete, who is biologically male, won a women's strongwoman competition, but was disqualified once the information became public. The hosts reflected on the complications this creates for fairness and the need for clear guidelines to protect the integrity of women's sports. While respecting the dignity and identity of transgender individuals was acknowledged, the podcast argued that biological realities cannot be ignored in competitive arenas where physical advantages impact results. The conversation also highlighted broader societal debates about inclusivity versus fairness, noting the emotional and political complexities involved. They expressed a belief that the current progressive stance favoring inclusion at the expense of fairness is losing support among many women and sports enthusiasts. A lively analysis of the upcoming, or rumored, boxing match between internet personality Jake Paul and heavyweight star Anthony Joshua was offered. The discussion outlined Joshua's credentials as an Olympic gold medalist, former heavyweight champion, and his recent dominant performances, contrasting that with Jake Paul's comparatively limited boxing experience against mixed competition primarily outside the professional boxing world. The hosts debated the fight's financial motivations, potential legitimacy, and competitive stakes. Despite the spectacle of Jake Paul stepping into the ring against a top-tier boxer, it was stressed Joshua's skill, power, and size make him a daunting opponent. The fight's outcome could significantly impact Joshua's career and the boxing landscape. There was also speculation about whether previous celebrity bouts had been fully competitive or staged with muted intensity, but presumptions were made that this heavyweight fight would be more intense and earnest. The topic shifted toward personal safety in different environments, comparing American and British perspectives on self-defense laws. The UK's appropriate force concept was discussed, noting its complexities in situations where the defender's weapons or means differ from the aggressors, such as a brick versus a gun. Practical instances of self-defense, including stories of an artist handling a home invasion and a teacher confronting a bear attack, illustrated the instinctual challenges and moral dilemmas involving force use. The debate included observations on differing state laws in the U.S., such as Stand Your Ground statutes in Florida versus California's approach emphasizing the duty to retreat, illustrating how legality shapes behavior in emergencies. The guests reflected on the difficulty of balancing empathy and self-protection, emphasizing the need for individuals to have the right to defend themselves from real threats without undue legal jeopardy. An in-depth exploration into typing efficiency, keyboard layouts, and emergent communication technologies was presented. The conversation traversed from traditional QWERTY keyboards, designed inefficiently to slow down typewriters, to alternative layouts like Dvorak that reduce finger movement and increase typing speed. The path dependency phenomenon explained why inefficient systems persist simply due to their historical adoption. More futuristic devices were introduced, including ergonomic split keyboards and the development of alter ego, a neural interface allowing silent communication via thought patterns detected by wearable devices. This technology permits telepathic dialogues in noisy environments by translating subvocalized words directly into speech, hinting at a future where verbal communication might be bypassed altogether. The guests marveled at how such advances could dramatically speed up and transform human interactions. The guests examined the malleability of human memory and the implications it has for eyewitness testimony and personal recollection. They discussed cases where memories were confused or contaminated by external stimuli, such as a victim misidentifying an attacker because a television show was playing during the crime, blending faces in the mind. The fallibility of memory challenges the notion that personal recollections are reliable accounts of reality. Relatedly, the power of hypnosis and suggestibility was discussed. Not everyone is equally susceptible to hypnosis, which can lead some individuals to perform actions or harbor beliefs implanted during trance states. These phenomena raise unsettling questions about mind control and the influence of external forces on subjective experience. Public demonstrations and psychological experiments illustrate how powerful these techniques can be, but also that susceptibility varies widely among individuals. The psychological cost and complexity of pursuing greatness were thoroughly explored. Most highly successful individuals interviewed or referenced in the podcast had difficult or traumatic childhoods, which arguably provide the internal fire and hunger that fuel their intense drive for success. However, this pursuit often creates inner turmoil, with high achievers simultaneously battling doubts, anxiety, and emotional struggles. Examples from elite athletes, fighters, and artists such as Mike Tyson, Ronnie O'Sullivan, and Dave Chappelle were discussed, showing how even admired figures suffer from mental health challenges and cognitive battles. The guests reflected on the tension between sacrificing present happiness for future success and the need to maintain passion and love for one's craft to sustain that drive. Madness and genius were considered intertwined, though men can manage that madness differently. Authenticity in creative and entertainment fields emerged as a critical theme. The guests considered how audiences crave genuine experiences and often react negatively to perceived fabrication, performative vulnerability, or artificial personas constructed for mass appeal. They criticized manufactured pop acts or personalities that lack the struggle and grit that typically endear audiences. The disruption brought about by AI and other technologies was addressed, with musicians and comedians expressing concern about bypassing traditional apprenticeship periods. The rise of AI-generated music or automated content threatens to undercut years of dedicated craft learning, leading to a risk of eroding the artistry that comes with human experience. Yet, technology's unstoppable progress will require adaptation, even as we mourn the loss of certain authentic elements. The discussion culminated in a meditation on the relationship between success and happiness, emphasizing how people often sacrifice present joy in pursuit of future achievements. They shared insights about the fleeting nature of achievement, the brief moments of victory overshadowed by the ongoing pressures to perform or attain new goals. This led to reflections on the shames some feel in enjoying small pleasures, as cultural norms tend to undervalue everyday happiness in favor of grand milestones. Candid stories from professional athletes and entertainers illustrated this struggle. While pursuing excellence requires intense focus and sometimes self-denial, sustaining a fulfilling life involves reconciling ambition with present-moment contentment. The podcast encouraged embracing simple joys and warned against trading away happiness solely for the promise of success, painting the pursuit of fulfillment as a lifelong balancing act.